If you could have any superpower, what would it be? Wait, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. I can't talk about superpowers. I have to talk about superheroes first. What is a superhero? Ignore the popular image of tights and super strength and origins that take 50 years to explain in their entirety, and let's clean it up. For all of their complex pathologies, for all of their absurd origins, the central idea of the superhero is marvelous in its simplicity. Someone with a look, an ability, and the moral strength to be good for good reasons. It's an easy concept to work with, and it's easy to graft plenty of other stories onto that concept. In fact, even that definition may be too broad. Let's be neutral and define the superhero as someone with an increased capacity to act and exert power, to demonstrate agency. A superhero is an agent.
His first name is Agent.
But an agent of what? Let's face it, nearly every superhero made after that first one is essentially a variation on a brightly colored theme. But what are those variants? What are the guiding ideologies of a group like, say, the Avengers? Well, let's look at them one by one. What does Steve Rogers stand for? Well, okay, the A doesn't stand for France. Personifications of the United States of America are older than the United States. Uncle Sam, famously, and Columbia, archaically, are both dressed in the flag, as is Steve Rogers. Nationalistic imagery pervades the Captain America stories, not just in the campy songs, but among his band of brothers, ripped straight from a company in any given romanticized World War II action movie. But he doesn't just dwell in action films. Look at this heart-wrenching scene.
It's not gonna be a safe landing, but I can try and force it down.
I'll get Howard on the line. He'll know what to do.
There's not enough time.
Switch the nationalities, and it's a scene from this World War II era romance.
Repeat, are you wounded? Are you bailing out?
What's your name?
June.
Yes, June, I'm bailing out. I'm bailing out, but there's a catch. I've got no parachute.
Captain America didn't fight in the actual Second World War. He fought in the war that we want to fight. But it's not enough to say that Rogers is draped in the flag. There's still a soldier under the stars and stripes. The rhetoric of the American armed forces tend to be phrased as challenges. Look sharp, be sharp, go Army, be all that you can be, the few and the proud, Army strong, and the slogan of Rogers' time, I want you. A challenge to give yourself up for something larger. A challenge that Rogers accepts readily. He's chosen for the Super Soldier program because he's willing to give himself up. He wins over his superiors through his willingness to self-sacrifice. He insists on pushing himself past a limit because his country needs him. And rather than let his nation be destroyed, he willingly destroys himself. He embodies the famous line by Horace, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. It is sweet and becoming to die for the country. Captain America's ideology is the heroism in selflessness. So what about the self-made man? What about Tony Stark? He doesn't live in 1940s war movies. If anything, he lives in 1940s screwball comedies.
12%.
An argument can be made for 15.
12%?
Well, I meant
Right,
to let you
baby.
go, Hildy, but you know how it is. You never
Heavy
miss the
lifting.
water
Literally,
till
I
the well
lifted
runs
heavy
dry.
things.
Inventor heroes in American fiction go back a little over a century, when real-life millionaire inventors like Henry Ford and Thomas Edison inspired penny dreadfuls about hyper-competent boy inventors like Frank Reed, Jack Wright, and Tom Swift. Tony Stark isn't a boy. Well, mentally, maybe, but there's a more interesting ideological precedent than the penny dreadful.
Man's mind is his basic means of survival, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind.
Ayn Rand developed a cult following for her hatred of altruism, her worship of the individual, and her doctrine of selfishness. Her novels are full of hyper-talented men willing to destroy anything that misuses their ideas. One scene in Atlas Shrugged sees magnate Hank Rearden brought before Congress and ordered to give up the secret of an alloy he created. Tony Stark finds himself in a similar situation. Another Rand novel, The Fountainhead, ends with Howard Rourke destroying his own building to protect the purity of his vision. Drastic, yes, but Stark does the same when he sees his vision compromised.
Effective immediately, I am shutting down the Weapons Manufacturer Division of Stark International.
In fact, all of Iron Man's cinematic rogues gallery are people who have taken Stark's technology and used it poorly. Terrorists and business rivals, all using Stark weaponry against Stark's will and against Stark's beliefs. And Stark, like Rourke, like Rearden, not only creates fantastic inventions, he constantly fights to keep those inventions from those who would corrupt them. to protect the Stark name. Iron Man's ideology is the heroism in selfishness. But what about someone older? What about Thor? Obviously, the character is drawn from Norse mythology, as is his family, the Aesir, although the Norse Aesir and Marvel's Aesir are quite different. For example, Norse Thor is a redhead. Also, he once wore women's clothing during a quest to get his hammer back. Also, Loki gave birth to an 8-legged horse that his father rides into battle, and anyway, the cinematic Thor generally hasn't delved into the stories of actual Norse myth. Yet. What myth they have explored isn't Norse, but Arthurian. Whoever pulls the enchanted weapon from the stone shall be king of all, and so on and so forth. One could say that Thor has his powers by rule of divine right, which is a Christian concept, not a pagan one, and Thor's speech in the comics and in the films has never sounded Norse. No Viking ever said thee or thou. If anything, Thor speaks with the early modern English of Shakespeare. Not only that, Shakespeare pervades the family dynamics of Odin's clan. Odin has a little Lear in him, as a dying king who banishes the child that loves him and keeps the hateful child close enough to betray him. Loki has some kin in Edmund, also from King Lear. Edmund the bastard child, eternally jealous of Edgar, his legitimate half-brother, ambitious to the point of danger. But more than King Lear, Thor's family has plenty of parallels to Henry IV. There's even a built-in Falstaff. Hi, Volstagg. Odin is Old Henry, desperately trying to secure his line by making his irresponsible prince into a chivalrous king, Prince Hal, a role that made Thor's director famous. And the wastrel prince, Prince Hal, the future Henry V, is both Thor and Loki. Like Thor, he has a hedonist streak, spending time starting fights and drinking heavily. And like Loki, he's Machiavellian, willing to wear many faces in order to achieve his goals. The character was Shakespeare's answer to an old question: by what right do kings rule? In Thor's case, he rules by being close to his subjects. Like Hal, he drinks with them, but unlike Hal, he doesn't abandon them. At least, for long. Instead, he saves them, he falls in love with them, he gives his life for them. And so he earns the right to be king by being with commoners, learning their ways and how to use his power wisely and justly. Thor's ideology is the heroism in mastering others. And what about Bruce Banner? He's pretty far from Shakespearean. But what he is pre-Victorian. One of his most obvious literary ancestors is Frankenstein's monster. Like the monster, the Hulk was made in a freak laboratory accident, let loose into the world and chased by armed mobs, seeing him as unnatural. Also like the monster, he's usually portrayed as green-skinned. But the Hulk's closer kin in Victorian literature would be Dr. Henry Jekyll and Mr. Edward Hyde. Jekyll and Hyde have a similar dynamic to Banner and the Hulk. They both hate their other half. Hyde was a way for Jekyll to banish his hateful impulses into another being, leaving something pure behind, an intentional personality split. The Hulk was never intentional, though Banner also spends most of his time trying to banish the Hulk from his life. Neither pair succeed, of course. Hyde's murderous impulses took over Jekyll's life, forcing him to pay for Hyde's crimes. Robert Louis Stevenson ended his novel with Jekyll's death from suicide, fearing that Hyde would take over his body completely. The novella is often read as an expression of Victorian notions of good and evil, that all people were born with sin, and that failure to recognize this inherent sin, that is, pride, was therefore the greatest sin of all. Hence the saying, pride comes before the fall. Banner did what Jekyll never could, solve that tension, not through Western theology, but through Eastern theology. In the Tao Te Ching, it's written, one may detract from a thing, and it is enhanced thereby, or enhance it, and so detract from it. By accepting that he has something sinful within him, by stopping his attempts to banish his evil parts, he can use his strength for good. He's always angry. The Hulk's ideology is the heroism in mastering the self. And what about the force that brought them all together? What about S.H.I.E.L.D. and all of its agents? Well, Ian Fleming's an obvious ideological father. S.H.I.E.L.D. has its roots in Uncle and other creatively acronymed organizations. Nick Fury has more than a little James Bond in him. Black Widow grew out of 100 or so Western fantasies of Russian spies seduced to the side of capitalism, who are often seduced by James Bond. And then there's Hawkeye, who has a bow. But they were all molded in some way to cash in on the 60s spy craze, a genre that molded itself on a black and white mentality. This was a genre that reflected the times when the world was split in two, between democracy and communism, between right and wrong. Well, times changed. And the spy genre changed. The swinging, hard-drinking libertines of Ian Fleming gave way to the troubled and doubting spies of authors like John le Carré.
Don't you think it's time to recognize there is as little worth on your side as there is on mine?
As information leaked and America learned just what its country did to protect itself, the spy genre became tinged with moral ambiguity. Yes, protection's important, but to what lengths? And just what are these spies protecting? What is their ideology? With so many covers and compartmentalizations, how can S.H.I.E.L.D. have an ideology? In one of le Carré's later novels, he snarled that ideologies have no heart of their own. They're the whores and angels of our striving selves. And what are they striving towards? That cultural ambivalence towards the spy game and to the military actions of government likely influenced Marvel's decision to make S.H.I.E.L.D. and its nemesis, Hydra, exist in the same entity. The good and bad we do to protect ourselves. It can't be coincidence that S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters is located directly across the river from the Watergate Hotel. We know that Fury's done wrong. He compartmentalizes. We know that Romanoff has done wrong. She has red on her ledger. But maybe in the hopes of finding what's right, maybe in finding their own heroism, maybe that could be enough to redeem themselves. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s ideology is the heroism in anti-heroism. You might have noticed that these things have absolutely nothing to do with each other. And you're right. They all come from different writers with different interests who only exist in the same universe because they're owned by the same company. A company that had the guile to realize that not everyone would like the same character. So they made a bunch of them. Agents of different ideologies, fighting for what they, and their fans, consider the side of morality. Simple, right? Here's where it gets complex. When the moral ones can't agree on what constitutes morality. Looking at each hero closely, the idea of a team-up is unlikely, since each major character is supported by rather disparate sets of stories. In critical theory, these sets of stories can be called modes of discourse, or grand narratives, or meta-narratives. Big ideas supported by millions of smaller ideas. To a post-structuralist, religion is a meta-narrative. So's communism. So's feminism and scientific progress and Freudian theory and hedonism, all modes of discourse that organize and legitimize our systems of morality. Modes of discourse that, well, may not always agree with each other. In 1984, the post-structuralist philosopher Jean-François Lyotard defined the postmodern condition as incredulity towards meta-narratives. As Lyotard saw it, as technology improved our ability to share and therefore scrutinize new ideas, each meta-narrative had disproven itself. In his words, the narrative function is losing its functors, its great hero, its great dangers, its great voyages, its great goal. Imagine a hero of their own story suddenly introduced to the potential of other stories.
You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you become part of a bigger universe.
Would that hero be the hero in another story? Is a scientist a hero to a soldier to a scientist?
You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play. To lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you.
You're a laboratory experiment, Rogers. Everything special about you came out of a bottle.
Of course, Lyotard had plenty of critics. One of the most common criticisms was, of course, isn't incredulity towards meta-narratives itself a meta-narrative? Good question. Each of these grand stories were constructed out of other grand stories, so wouldn't their combination simply be a deconstruction in order to reconstruct? Wouldn't they simply reach a synthesis? Of course they do reach a synthesis, not only because bad guys need to be stopped, but because tickets need to be sold. That's what the Marvel brand has done. Just as the comics did 50 years ago, the movies have found a strange balance between its disparate influences. Strange, but possibly bland. Ideology oversimplified into the good guys are the ones who hit the bad guys.
How do we know the good guys from the bad guys? If they're shooting at you, they're bad.
And who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Just the ones who are designated so? Will we just accept that these are Earth's mightiest heroes and cheer them on because heroes are simply the ones that are cheered? What do they even stand for? They have to fight for something. They demonstrably cannot be agents of nothing. Is the hero supposed to be selfish, or boastful, or dangerous, or manipulative, or sanctimonious? Because put them together and they sure bring out the worst in one another. And what about all these other people being forced on us? How many damn superheroes do we really need anyway? Well, theoretically, infinite. As many heroes as there are ways to be heroic. Each hero the apogee of an ideology, organized into a pantheon that categorizes and re-legitimizes the myriad ways to be a hero. Through sacrifice, through innovation, through discipline, through humility, through redemption, or simply doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. All of these are heroic. The modern notion of heroism is complicated and contradictory, but looking at superheroes uncritically, it's easy to forget that. Most people who consume superhero stories don't openly question the problematic elements of the superhero genre. The shades of militarism and vigilantism, the reactionary framework, the belief that there's no problem in the world that can't be solved by punching something. And that's because most people read superhero stories symbolically. Your favorite superhero isn't your savior, or a government-sanctioned security force, or your secret crush, or a lone vigilante working their will on society. It's you. The costumes, the powers, all an elaborate symbol for the reader's desired agency. The desire for the capacity to effect change on the world. Because we want to stop the greedy and the murderous and the tyrannical, because they symbolize everything that we can't control. We tell these stories because we all want to feel like we have the power to shape the world into something better. But all too often, we never consider what we want to shape the world into, the ideologies that define our moralities. If Lyotard is right, and our age is defined by disinterest in the grand narratives, we risk thinking that we stand for nothing. So yes, cheer the good guys on, thrill at their amazing feats, but both Marvel and their audience should know what they're fighting for. So let's make that old question more interesting. If you could have any superpower, how would you use it?
The arcane-striking superhero changed to Viking superhero, a humdinging, real swinging, shield-blinging superhero.